Welcome to Unlocking Passion, the Women's Edit. Let's begin with a new story. Some souls are like fragile glass, marked by cracks that no one sees. Leonie S. was 19 years old, and her young life was already a labyrinth of loss and rejection. Raised in a children's home near Koblenz, she knew no security, no unconditional love. Her parents were shadows, addicted, unstable, violent, a source of pain, not of refuge. From childhood on, Leonie learned to function, to adapt, to please, just to catch at least a spark of recognition. She was considered beautiful, with a quiet, almost melancholic aura. But this outward beauty concealed her loneliness. She carried within her the fear of being invisible, of not being enough, and longed for that one person who would finally truly see her and hold her. It was a longing that burned in her stomach, a constant unfulfilled hunger for belonging. This emptiness was like a cold wind blowing through her innermost being, no matter how hard she tried to drive it away with work and distraction. Her escape was Instagram. Between radiant influencers and glittering luxury yachts, she pieced together a life that had nothing to do with her own. She worked as a waitress. Everyday life was gray, but her dreams were colorful. She dreamed of an escape, of a glamorous life that she stitched together from perfect images. She was receptive to recognition, to the illusion of luxury, and to the desperate desire to finally be someone's only one. Because deep in her heart she believed, true closeness is not something that happens to me. But a quiet, forbidden hope still glowed inside her. It was the hope that kept her alive despite all disappointments, a delicate butterfly that refused to die even in the coldest wind. That hope was her Achilles' heel. A tiny gap in her armor through which disaster would enter. Leonie was scrolling tiredly through her feed when a TikTok reel made her stop. A man spoke calmly, almost poetically. "You do not belong in a gray place. You were made for the light." The speaker was Hakim B, 36 years old, supposedly a wealthy yacht owner in Saint-Tropez. His Instagram profile screamed exclusivity, photos in expensive clothes, parties on luxury yachts in front of sunsets, a life that seemed unreachable to Leonie. Every picture, every carefully chosen phrase was a masterpiece of seduction, aimed directly at her deepest wishes, at those unspoken dreams she hid so carefully. She commented on the reel, a small, hesitant expression of her longing. And then came a private message. It was Hakim. "You remind me of someone I could never forget," he wrote. Leonie answered hesitantly at first, then daily. They were not crude compliments. He asked, "What is still keeping you there, Leonie? What ties you to that gray place?" He sent her photos of his yacht, of the endless sea, of sunsets that bathed the sky in gold, images of a world that seemed to touch her soul. She wrote to him, "I have never seen the sea." Her words were a quiet cry for help, an expression of her deepest longing. Hakim understood. He answered with words that caressed her soul. "The sea is waiting for you, little star. It is waiting to turn your tears into salt and your longing into endless vastness." With every message, every word he sent, a connection grew that Leonie had never experienced before. It was as if he were offering her an invisible hand to pull her out of the swamp of loneliness. The doubts she may still have had were washed away by the overwhelming flood of his attention and apparent affection. Her thoughts revolved only around him, around the pictures he painted of a shared future. The real world faded, and the layer of distance she had built toward other people melted under his constant seeming warmth. She began to lose herself in his words and in his world, so much that she could hardly perceive her own anymore. Every day without a message from him felt like an eternity, a return to the emptiness from which he had supposedly freed her. Subscribe to the channel if you can feel how dangerous longing can become, and how quickly dreams can turn into nightmares. Do not miss any of our true crime documentaries that illuminate the dark abysses of the human psyche. Saint-Tropez. The name alone was music in Leonie's ears, a promise of glamour and freedom. And then she was there. The sun burned gently on her skin. The sea sparkled in countless shades of turquoise. She stood on the deck of the yacht. White fabric fluttered in the wind around her. And Hakim was charming, gentle, his eyes radiating warmth. "Trust me, little star," he whispered. "You do not have to do anything, just be with me. Here you are safe." His words were like a warm blanket wrapping itself around her trembling soul, the promise of protection and security that she had been deprived of for so long. She absorbed his words like a sponge soaking up the water of his affection. The first days were an intoxicating dance of luxury and attention. A life she could never have imagined, even in her wildest dreams. She felt like the main character in a film whose script had finally been written for her. But already on the first night he crossed boundaries that Leonie could not name. What began as tenderness slowly tipped into the expected, into the predetermined. He touched her in a way that she misunderstood as romance. But inside, her whole being cramped up. A quiet voice inside her screamed for resistance, but the fear of disappointing him, of losing him, was stronger. And although everything inside her resisted, she smiled because she believed she had to. She had to please in order to be loved. It was a deeply rooted pattern from her childhood that Hakim exploited masterfully. The golden cage she had dreamed of slowly closed around her. Every movement, every reaction of hers now seemed to belong no longer to herself, but to be an answer to his unspoken expectations. An icy breath of realization brushed her soul, but she pushed it aside, suppressed the rising panic, because the price of truth seemed infinitely higher than the price of silence. The nights grew longer, the joy of the day faded as soon as darkness fell. A feeling of oppression settled over her heart that she could not interpret because she refused to acknowledge the truth. The next morning he was loving, as if nothing had happened. He made her tea, stroked her hair, his voice was gentle. "I knew you were special, Leonie," he said. "Now you have finally opened up. Now you are finally ready for what we have." Leonie remained silent. A knot in her stomach, a feeling of nausea that she could not shake off. The contradictory feelings almost tore her apart. Gratitude for his affection struggled against the deep insecurity the night had left inside her. It was an emotional battlefield within her, one on which she was inevitably about to lose. Her soul was torn between the hope for unconditional love and the growing realization that she was trapped. Something inside her rebelled. But she felt the invisible leash that bound her to him. If she left, she would lose everything. Not only the luxury, not only the supposed happiness, but the only hope of finally being someone's only one. He began to make her emotionally dependent, to use her insecurity as a tool. He called it love. To her, it felt like a gentle cage whose bars had been forged from her own fears. When she cried, when her eyes threatened to reveal the truth, he said, "You are afraid of closeness, Leonie. That is your trauma, not my fault. You have to dissolve this blockage to be free." His words were like poison, clouding her thoughts, distorting her perception. Every time he brushed aside her tears with such sentences, she felt even guiltier, even more flawed. The belief that she was the problem, that her own blockage was the true cause of her discomfort, took root. She began to hate herself for her weakness, for her inability to dissolve this blockage that separated her from true closeness with Hakim. The hope of finally finding healing through him became the chain that pulled her ever deeper into his world. Guilt gnawed at her relentlessly, a constant whisper telling her she was not enough, that she was the reason for failure if she did not function the way he expected. The fear of losing his love was a permanent companion, a cold knot in her stomach that forced her to endure his every mood, to fulfill his every demand. What had begun like romance quickly became routine, obligation. Closeness was no longer voluntary, but expected, a part of the day. He said, "If you really want me, then endure this. Other women would be grateful for what I offer you." His words were a blow to her already damaged self-worth. Leonie began to split apart, not from him, but from herself. She functioned, she reacted, she smiled, but inside she was empty, a hollow space in which only the echo of his demands resounded. Her soul withdrew. A last, desperate attempt to protect itself from complete collapse. She became an actress in her own life, playing a role in order to survive. The shine in her eyes went out, replaced by an apathy that the people around her slowly noticed, but did not understand. She adapted until she no longer recognized herself. Her gaze became rigid. The lively melancholy gave way to an empty apathy. Her own voice, which she had still found in the Instagram comments, fell silent. She later spoke about it and said, "I was no longer in my body. I was only an image of myself, a doll he moved." Every gesture, every look she once had been her own. Now she was a reflection of his expectations. The feeling of alienation from herself was almost unbearable. She felt her true self disappear behind an impenetrable wall, while only an empty shell remained, reacting to his commands. The once so radiant dreams of glamour and freedom turned into a nightmare of control and loss that corroded her a little more from the inside every day. The days blurred into one long fog. She slept a lot, but found no rest. The drops he sometimes gave her to calm her made her sink even deeper into this state of felt emptiness. Hakim began to demand money. At first, they were small amounts, inconspicuous requests. "My card was blocked. Little star just for a moment. You help me. I help you." A seemingly harmless favor between lovers. He took 3,000 euros, then 5,000 euros. He sent her pictures of alleged investments, of projects he was planning. Leonie paid because she believed that without him she was nothing, that her worth was tied to his existence. Every transfer was like a sacrifice she placed on the altar of her supposed love, a desperate attempt to secure his affection and maintain the fragile balance of their relationship. The money she would have urgently needed for herself flowed through her fingers like water, without her truly regretting it, because the fear of losing Hakim weighed more heavily than any financial concern. He intensified the psychological pressure. "You are not like the others, are you, Leonie? The ones who only take and can give nothing." She fell silent again, because in her head there echoed a sentence she knew from childhood: "If he leaves me, I am worth nothing." And she could not bear that. The thought of falling back into emptiness and loneliness was infinitely more painful than the loss of money. Her bank account emptied, but her soul had already become the real sacrifice. She saw herself in a mirror of horror. A woman ruining herself financially and emotionally for a promise that had long since broken. The pain of helplessness and self-destruction was unbearable, but the fear of being alone was even greater. A fear that paralyzed her and chained her to Hakim, even as he systematically destroyed her. She was trapped in a vicious circle of demands, fear, and the desperate attempt to maintain a love that had never been real. After 7 weeks, Leonie was exhausted. Her money was gone, her gaze empty. Her soul seemed to have fled from her body. She was nothing but a shell anymore, an echo of the girl who had once dreamed of a life in the light. One day, at a market in Saint-Tropez where Hakim had exceptionally taken her with him, an older woman approached her, a tourist whose eyes were warm and concerned. "Is everything all right, child? You look so pale." This simple sentence, this unexpected gesture of care, tore something open inside Leonie, a small, painful spark of realization. In a moment of clarity, while Hakim was distracted, she made a desperate decision. With the help of the woman, whose face she barely recognized, she fled. She ran barefoot, with only her ID in her hand, straight to the local police station. There she collapsed. There she learned the cruel truth. Hakim B was known. Not a wealthy yacht owner, but a wanted love scammer active throughout southern France. A perpetrator who had systematically used young, disoriented women without family support, emotionally, financially, and sexually. The world into which she had fled in order to be seen had been a carefully staged backdrop. The blow of this realization was brutal, tearing her out of her trance-like state and making the full perfidy of the deception painfully real. The illusion shattered into 1,000 pieces, and she stood there alone, surrounded by the ruins of her destroyed dream. The tears she had held back for so long now flowed unchecked, a cry of liberation and unbearable pain at the same time. Leonie now lives in a therapeutic institution in Germany. Her body is free again, but her soul needs time. The way back to life is long and painful, marked by the laborious reconstruction of her self-worth. Trauma therapy helps her regain control over her thoughts and feelings which Hakim had stolen from her so systematically. Every day is a small battle, a slow relearning of trust in herself, in others. The pain of the lost months, the stolen youth, and the shattered dreams is a constant companion. But in the small steps of progress, in every word she rediscovers, in every feeling she is able to allow, there lies a spark of new hope. It is a laborious, often lonely path. But Leonie is determined to reclaim her life and her dignity piece by piece. The nightmares are still there, the fear of being alone. But she is learning to live with them, to accept them as part of her story, not as its end.